In March of 1941, C.S. Stevenson, commander of preventive medicine for the U.S. Navy, sent a memo to Rear Admiral Ross McIntyre which said, "We are not protecting the men as we should." Pearl Harbor was still 9 months in the future, although it was generally acknowledged by the Roosevelt administration that U.S. involvement in the war was inevitable. U.S. servicemen had yet to see combat under their own flag. What was Stevenson's issue? The heading on the memo was Asbestosis. This memo, uncovered years later, is one of the many documents proving that the U.S. government, as well as corporate America, have long known about the dangers of asbestos and deliberately withheld that information from the public. Today, decades later, those suffering from the agony of mesothelioma are asking why their government and/or employers failed to protect them. Charles A., a former shipyard worker, understands too well. Money. A. has testified in several legal actions. He has said that by 1975, corporations and government alike understood that to fully protect workers would have required the use of special hazmat suits, such as are used by EPA inspectors. By the time you add up the cost of all that protective gear, you are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a lot cheaper to let them work unprotected, said A. This is the type of behavior most knowledgeable Americans had now come to expect from corporations. But what does it say when a government of we the people fails to protect its own servicemen and women from such an avoidable danger? What is the dollar value of a human life? While this concept should seem an obscenity, the law states quite clearly that asbestos victims and the courts have a right to make that determination. Fighting for victims' rights. Mesothelioma and the law covering it falls into two categories: regulatory statutes, which specify what steps industry must now take to protect employees, and personal injury law, known in legal terms as tort, allowing victims to take action against institutions responsible for their asbestos exposure, as well as the manufacturers of the substance. Because corporate America has largely taken over the federal government today, preserving the right of asbestos victims to sue is a constant battle. Since the 1980s, and particularly for the past 6 years, most members of Congress on both sides of the aisle have been more interested in protecting the corporate interests who donate to their campaigns than serving the constituents who elect them. One particularly egregious example was the recent FAIR Act, which was the very antithesis of fairness. The Fairness and Asbestos Resolution Act was introduced by Senator Arlen Specter in April of 2005. This bill would have deprived citizens of the right to file suit against corporations for injuries related to asbestos. Instead, the federal government would have established a private trust fund financed by insurance companies and responsible corporations from which malignant mesothelioma and other asbestos victims would be compensated. The bill's proponents claimed it would speed up the recovery process for claimants. However, such claimants would receive only a fraction of their deserved compensation, while the corporations who willfully and negligently exposed workers and their families to a substance they knew to be toxic would be absolved from any and all liability. The bill died in the Senate in February of 2006, but was reintroduced by Specter in May of that year. The Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on the bill 10 days later, but no action has been taken on it since. Nonetheless, federal judges appointed by the current administration continue to rule in favor of corporate interests. Recently, U.S. District Judge Donald Malloy dismissed conspiracy charges against the owners of Montana's infamous Libby mine and disallowed scientific evidence as well as asbestos samples in spite of documented facts showing that Libby residents suffer from respiratory disease and asbestos cancer at abnormally high rates. Prosecutors are currently bringing the case before the U.S. Court of Appeals. Taking legal action. Despite ongoing attempts by corporations, with help from their allies in the legislature, to shield themselves from any liability, legal actions continue to move forward across the nation. In the vast majority of cases, justice is being served for asbestos victims. When it comes to mesothelioma and the law, there are two issues to keep in mind: the statute of limitations and causation. The former is the period of time starting from the day you are diagnosed within which you must file your claim. If you fail to do so, you will lose your right to bring such an action. The statutes of limitations vary by state, but run between 1 and 3 years. It is to your advantage to file a claim as soon as possible once you are diagnosed. Causation means that you, as the plaintiff, must demonstrate that your disease is a result of asbestos exposure and that such exposure was due to the defendant's negligence. Documentation of a thorough, professional diagnosis by an experienced oncologist is important, as well as evidence that your employer or company in question knew or should have known that a hazard existed and neglected to take action which would have protected the plaintiff from said hazard. Keep in mind that the wheels of justice often turn slowly. The entire process can take several months or even years. Even if the judge or jury finds in your favor, an appeal on the defendant's part is almost certain. Likewise, if you or your attorney disagrees with the judge's decision, you have the right to appeal as well. Thank you for watching. This video was produced by Asbestos.Net, a leading resource on all aspects of asbestos and mesothelioma. Our priority is to inform victims about the devastating effects of asbestos exposure, mesothelioma, asbestos cancer, asbestosis, and other asbestos-related diseases, and to advise them with a wealth of information. Individuals whose lives have been touched by mesothelioma have numerous questions and concerns. Their caregivers and family members also need accurate, reliable information. If you or a loved one have been diagnosed with mesothelioma or asbestos cancer and need more information, we invite you to visit and explore the thousands of pages of oncologist-reviewed material on Asbestos.net, to call our convenient toll-free number shown below and speak with a mesothelioma specialist, or to use the simple contact form found at Asbestos.net to request a free copy of our informative books, custom inserts, and DVD. Asbestos.net. Information and help for patients and families.